I need some traction.
Hey folks, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Traction and Boast AI. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast AI, Launch Academy, and in partnership with VanHack. And excited for this topic. You know, in early stage startups, there's a lot of resources, getting off the ground, validating your idea, getting your first customers, getting to product market fit. But how do you grow to 20 million in revenue and beyond? And we have an exciting speaker here today, Hope. She's the founder and CEO of Lemonlight, a video production company that produces and distributes branded video content at scale. She's a 3-time entrepreneur located in the Silicon Beach community, so LA. Grew the company from 30 to 130 employees in under a year last year, bootstrapped to over 10 million. Hope, thank you so much for joining us. You give us hope that we can all build 20 million plus revenue companies. That was a little cheesy, but thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm excited to be here. Great to meet you.
Awesome. And fairly international crowd, or at least North America-wide crowd, from San Francisco, India, Denver, Seattle, Toronto, Edmonton, Utah, Colorado. Wow, I like it. More and more people are tuning in. So let's get right into it. Today's topic, 20 million ARR and beyond, playbook for overcoming inefficiencies that come with growth. But before you grow, you got to start up. You got to validate the idea. You got to get early customers. How did you come up with the idea for Lemonlight? How did you get your first customers? How did you validate it? Give us the backstory.
Great story. Kind of funny, actually. So I come from an ad tech background. And while I was working at the company before Lemonlight, basically what we saw was a lot of SMBs hungry for online opportunities to advertise their business. I think back then they had like Yelp and Groupon, but not a lot of other options. And so when we left there, we were in search of the most effective kind of online advertising, which we believed was going to be video. But unfortunately, at the time, video was like $300,000 to produce a commercial, and it took huge teams. And so our thesis was, if we can make video content affordable and accessible, we think people will buy it. So the very first thing we did, we spent $12. I made a very crude Squarespace website, which is, was embarrassing then, but kind of hilarious today. And ultimately, we just got a free account on MailChimp and just started emailing potential customers and to see if they would want to buy video content. And sure enough, they did. We actually sold $30,000 worth of video in our first month, which we thought was great. But the problem was we didn't actually know how to make any video content at the time. And so that was me and my first co-founder, Chad. And so within the first 30 days, we immediately brought on our third co-founder, Daniel, who comes from a video production background. That's what he had been doing for years, and kind of hit the ground running. So in short, definitely try to sell what we were going to make before we actually even know how to make it.
Not a lot of founders do that, and it warms my heart because before Traction was a thing, before our first conference, we created a Squarespace site and invited a whole bunch of speakers and put it up. And once we sold like 30, 40K in tickets, we were like, oh, we got to get a venue now. I guess this is really a thing, right? You don't know if people want it, build it and they will come is not a thing. And the best way to validate something is when people put their money where their mouth is. So this is fantastic. At what point did you say this can be a big company, this can be a thing, I have product market fit? Were there some, I guess, data-driven indicators, or was it just a feeling? Describe that.
I feel like there's so much you question so many things early on, or at least I did. I felt like I was never really sure. It's like, okay, well, yeah, everything seems to be good and customers seem to be buying our products, but I kept thinking like, oh, this is limited. When we hit this, I was like very nervous. I was like, when we hit this milestone, nobody's going to want video anymore. And the truth is we kept breaking those barriers and we kept seeing people buy. And I think really one of the biggest moments for me was actually when Travelocity came to us organically and bought a big video package from us. And I think, we've always been a champion for the small, medium-sized business, and we still are today. But I think when I saw the need for even larger brands, enterprise brands needing affordable, easy video content, that's when I was like, all right, we may be onto something.
And were there elements of maybe, I don't know, retention, customer spending more? Were there those things that you looked at as a part of that?
definitely. You know, at a very base level, it was growth. You know, we basically doubled revenue year over year since we started, minus COVID, of course. And that was a big driver for us. I think that's what we kept focusing on. And we believed that if we could continue to hit those numbers, that we were continuing to stay relevant in the market. And so I would say just general growth was important. And then average order value. I think as the market continued to shift, you would see that people needed more and more video content. I even remember it's very clearly, I think in 2017, we had this big all hands meeting. We said, look, up until now, you know, our pitch to customers was, if you have a website, you need a video, right? Like you need a video for your business. And it was around 2017 that we had this epiphany that it was like, you no longer need a video for your business. You need video content for your brand. And it wasn't just one video anymore. It was like, you need a video for ads and videos for your website and videos for your emails and for your organic social. And so I think that was also a kind of a big shift that we noticed and sort of, you know, tried to stay in front of.
Definitely. And in those early days, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced and how did you overcome them?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is payroll. I think if you are an entrepreneur who's bootstrapped, maybe not everybody, but a lot of us have been in those moments where it's like, oh my God, like I need all of our customers to pay, or we need to hit these numbers, or we're going to be in really big trouble. And I remember having those, this is like almost embarrassing to admit, but I remember having those days, you know, in the first year or two where we couldn't do direct deposit because we couldn't afford to run payroll a couple days before, which is typically how direct deposit works. I would have to physically write everybody checks on the day of payroll and then pray that everyone didn't deposit them the same day. And it worked almost not even every single time it worked. I don't even know if anybody in our team knows that today. And obviously today is a lot different, but those were really scary times. Because, you know, those were fears we really couldn't share with anyone. Luckily, I have two amazing co-founders. So, you know, the three of us knew it, but we could never share those fears kind of beyond that. And those were hard. You know, I remember a lot of sleepless nights. I remember waking up in the morning and being like, oh, like, I don't even want to go to work today because I'm like too stressed out. But you get through it.
How did you fund yourself in those early days? I guess customers paying you is a great way to fund yourself.
I'm so sorry. You just cut out right at the beginning. I didn't hear the first couple words.
I said, how did you fund yourself in those early days? Customers paying you, I guess, is a great way to fund yourself. But was it all customer funding? Were there other sources of capital? And how did you manage that? Because the thing is, you know, when you're getting more and more customers that you have to also service with the revenue they pay you, then you have to balance growth and profitability, right? Like, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So yeah, we very much started as a service company. And so everything we did was money from our customers. And a lot of it really relied on them not only paying period, but also paying on time. And I think balancing that, you know, supply and demand, it's like truly goes back to Econ 101, like was the hardest part. It's like, how do we grow in order to support the customers that we're selling without having a bunch of people without anything to do and not being able to afford them. And, you know, the truth is at one point we finally hit this moment where we realized we were selling a lot of things at the beginning because we need, you know, back then we were like, we'll sell anything in order to make money. But we realized we had a lot of overhead and products that really weren't what we were great at, weren't really what we wanted to do. And so I remember overnight, we just turned them all off pretty much. And repurposed a lot of people on the team, you know, wound down our clients, obviously very kindly and slowly. But that was a big deal for us. And I think when we got really focused, we were able to balance the supply and demand a lot better.
Definitely. And then in terms of, you know, you bootstrapped this company, right? Like, what were the key things you did to get to that first million, 5 million, and then 10 million in revenue? Because after 10 million in revenue, 10, 11, you end up raising, and we'll get into that. But what were the key, I guess, ingredients to get to 1, 5, and 10 in your mind as a bootstrap founder, especially?
Yeah, you know, I think you have to be really focused and deliberate. You know, none of it happens by accident, at least not for me. So every year, you know, the second half of the year, we sit down and we start looking at the next year and we say, okay, what is our goal and how are we going to get there? You know, we're doing it as we speak this year. And once you start hitting those higher numbers, it's not just more of the same, right? We can't just turn up the volume on what we're doing because it's not always a 1-for-1 ratio. We have to find new revenue streams, introduce new products, figure out ways to expand our current revenue lines. And I think that's really what we've always focused on. We've always started with sales and marketing. One of my co-founders and I have a very strong sales and marketing background, and made a deliberate plan early enough. And it was multi-pronged, right? So even if one strategy didn't work, we had other strategies that were working, and we could find new things along the way to kind of try and find that balance. But I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds so basic, but truly it's planning. Figuring out, okay, well, if we want to hit this number, like how? What does that mean? If it's, let's just use outside sales because that's pretty simple. It's like if it's outside sales, like it's all a math equation at some point, right? How many customers do they need to reach out to? How many meetings do they need to have? How many XYZ until how many customers we're going to have? So if you do that for every single channel that you have, you're going to get a pretty good guess.
Definitely. And question here from Matt, I want to take it as you go along. Did you or do you produce your own content? I'm assuming you guys do, right? Or like it's all people who work for you that produce it versus like contracting out, or how does that work? I guess introduce us to how Lemonlight works.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of both. I would say like kind of similar to Uber, like you as a customer, you come and you buy a video from Lemonlight, and then Lemonlight staffs the right team to produce the content for you. Some are free internal full-time employees, some are freelancers. We made 730 videos last month. And from all over the world. And so we don't have full-time team members all over the world, but we do have relationships with very vetted, trained, what we call creators, independent creators that we work with. So we make sure that you're getting paired with the right person or the right group along the way, right? Because you need a lot of different people to create that content, from script writers to on-set people to editors. And so we're making sure that all of those connections are working together seamlessly and that you're getting to talk to the right people.
Great. Awesome. So, there's some interesting audience questions here. I'll take them as we go along. What has been the most successful marketing campaign for your business that maximizes like growth or leads? What is something you did that you're most proud of?
Well, those are two different questions, probably. What's been the most effective and what I'm most proud of?
Let's share both of them if you're good at that.
I really have to think. We've done so many things over the years. Honestly, there was something that we did early on that I got a lot of pushback for, and it's proven to be very effective for us. So for years, all we've, and this is going to come as like very like obvious to a lot of you, but some of you may be on the fence. But forever, you hear about how important long form content is and having a blog and creating content and sharing content, right? And when we first started Lemonlight, I knew how to do that, and I knew I could hire at least one other person to help me write the content. And I knew a little bit about SEO, enough to sort of know how to optimize keywords back then. And so that's what we started doing. And it took a very long time and a lot of pushback from some other folks on my team because they didn't think it was working or worth our time. But today we get hundreds of thousands of visitors from organic traffic. And it's all because of the content that we create. We ranked on page 1 for words like video production LA, or at least we have. Sometimes I know it fluctuates. But that's been, it's a long concerted effort, and it doesn't show fruits right away. But when it does, it can be really impactful.
Awesome. Cool. So let's get into the scaling side of things then, right? What were some of the key actions you took to get to 20 million? Like, what did that engine look like as you were doing that?
It's similar to what I said before, where you look at all the different revenue streams, you look at where you can add, you run all those numbers, right? At the end of the day, it's really all a math equation. And you see if that equals 20 million. And if it doesn't, then you have to keep thinking. So this getting to the 20 million, it's not easy by any means, of course. But it's a little bit clear. I think the part that was the biggest struggle for me personally was, how do we run a $20 million business and keep our customers happy and our teams happy and, the supply side basically. And man, that was tough, honestly. Like, there were a lot of rough nights. I think, we hired 13 managers in 12 months. I think it was something like that. And that was horrible. It was so hard. We went from having like
13 managers who reported to you.
Not just to me. I have two co-founders, so it was sort of split, and it was different levels of managers, some managers, some directors, some VPs. But it happened all kind of fast. And I just remember thinking like, this is chaos. And it was the time when the business was also growing the fastest. So I was like, it was the most inefficient I think we've ever ran our business. And I didn't know how we were going to get through it. I was like, this is just so chaotic. I feel like everyone is just running around with no idea what to do. And it's not like it used to be where like my co-founders and I could just kind of jump in and fix things because there were just too many things that needed to be fixed. So there was a lot of learning lessons in that.
Yeah, let's dive into that, because in many ways, right, scaling a company, again, is doing something new. You have to do things inefficiently, because when you start out and you have an idea and trying to validate it, you're doing things that are not efficient, right? You're just trying to figure out, how do I get my early customers, elbows out, maybe you're cold calling, cold emailing. By no means it's efficient, but then you figure it out. But then you get to this point of scale, you've gone from 30 people to 130 people in 1 year. You got to keep selling and growing and servicing customers while managing the emotional dynamic of onboarding 100 people in 1 year. And that is inefficient until you can figure out how to scale people now, not customers, efficiently. So how did you do that? What were your top learnings there, from a leadership perspective to manage this level of growth?
Yes. Okay. Some of the things I definitely learned in the hardest way possible. Understanding what you're looking for, right? I think, we didn't really have managers before. We had a few managers, but that was it basically before last year. And so I didn't really understand the difference between hiring, say, a manager, a director, a VP, or anything in between. I kind of thought they were all kind of the same, but had a little bit different experience. And I thought they could kind of all do the same thing. And I thought that if I brought in the right people, that I could just sort of give them the reins and that they would figure it all out, find all the solutions. And those were the two biggest learning lessons right away. So one of my favorite quotes that I heard is managers, evolution, executives, revolution. And there's a big distinction there, right? You can't hire someone with managerial experience and expect them to revolutionize a department or an area, a function. So really getting clear on those. And similarly, you can't hire an executive and expect them to be able to do both, right? Like there's not enough time to do both if you really want them to be great at revolution. And so getting really clear on what it is we needed to hire and being more specific with those roles. That was a huge one. And then also giving them a lot more support, right? Thinking that no matter how smart they are, or where they're coming from, or how great they are, they don't know your company like you do, right? So making sure that you are spending a ton of time with them, trying to give them all of the information that you have, or at least as much as possible, so that they're building from where you are at and not from where they were or where they think you are or from the bottom. Because what happens is they'll spend a lot of time doing things that like you may already know don't work, right? You know for sure they don't work because you've tried them. But because you didn't give them that information to start, they basically spend a lot of time doing inefficient things. And it can feel frustrating for you and very, very frustrating for them. So those are two of the really big ones, I think, especially from like a leadership team. And then for the team itself, it's about team. We have a hybrid model, which I think has been really, really helpful because it does allow for in-person collaboration. And so the first Friday of every month, we have an all hands meeting, which we always try to keep really upbeat and fun. We cut out early, we go do an activity. It has to be deliberate. I think thinking that culture and will just happen is not, unfortunately, the case. It has to be a deliberate effort to create that, I think.
What would be, nirvana of evolution and revolution? What is that ideal feeling or maybe ideal state of an executive or somebody in evolution and revolution, if you had to describe what the nirvana of that looks like?
Yeah. So a great manager is going to come in and talk about, they're going to be able to evolve existing processes and systems and structures and make them better, right? Continue to improve them, hopefully hold the team accountable to them, slowly over time, enhance them. Revolution means they come in, they see a process that's not working, and they know how to like understand the process on a much deeper level, understand the real problems. That's a whole different thing I can talk about, which are like perceived problems and actual problems. And build something new for it. Work with other, cross-department functions to build something from scratch that will really shift or change the way something is done inherently. I don't think you can expect the managers to do that. If that makes sense.
Yes, certainly. Awesome. And so then from a leadership perspective, right? What changes did you need to make to revise or shift this leadership strategy in going from now this bootstrap company to 10 plus million and then adding 100 people, growing to 20 plus? Like, what are some key things people should consider?
One of the biggest epiphanies that I had somewhat recently, to be able to support that level of growth and keep a team happy and customers happy and executives happy and investors happy and everybody else that needs to be happy. I think you have to have a really balanced leadership team. And so for a long time, I didn't know what that meant. And I couldn't understand why maybe one, VP really gravitated towards one manager that I was like on the fence about, or vice versa. And then one day I had this realization. I believe that there are 3 different leadership styles: people first leadership, process first leadership, and performance first leadership. You can be a combination of those things, but I think inherently we gravitate toward one or the other. And I noticed over time, the departments that we were having the most problems with were when they were very much the same. So we would have like a people-driven VP, a people-driven manager, right? And I couldn't understand for the longest time, they had very happy direct reports, like the happiest direct reports in the company. And I was like, well, they're obviously doing something right. But I was really flustered, and some other people on the team were really flustered because the processes weren't being followed or performance KPIs weren't always being hit. And I started to notice this kind of this pattern. And ever since then, I think I've been able to identify like what other people are, and being able to name it and talk about it has really been helpful, right? So it's like, if I have a very people-driven leader, that's great. Acknowledge that. That's so important, right? All of these things are important. It's pretty much impossible to scale without having all 3 in place. But what that might mean is if I have to hire above or below them, you might want to hire below someone that's a little bit more process-driven, and then someone above that's a little bit more performance-driven. It's really about finding the right balance so that all 3 areas are being equally prioritized, essentially. If that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. Now getting into finding your C-suite, what percentage of your C-suite you hired new versus grew from within? And what are some rules for curating the most effective C-suite to manage this type of your next wave of growth?
Yeah, C-suite. So we describe executives as VPs and C-suite. And so we've made a couple of errors there, I would say. Other than the 3 founders, everyone has been brought in externally. We have promoted one person, I would say maybe too early to that role. And they kind of had to backtrack in that scenario. And then hired just, of course, the wrong person in general once. Also not great, learned a lot. But mostly externally, because I think at the end of the day, like, my 2 co-founders, the 3 of us, like we've done maybe not everything we know, but we've done a lot of what we know, right? We've kind of grown the business as effectively as we can with the information that we have. At this point, we are really reliant on outside people to come in with way more experience than us to help teach us things, elevate the company, help us get to that next step.
Definitely. Now, in terms of mistakes you made, we hired a lot of execs. I think more than half of them are not there. As founders, what happens is you bootstrap, then you raise this round of funding, and you get enamored by big logos, big companies, and you bring these execs on, and you've been so hard at rolling up your sleeves And these execs, when they come in, their first reaction is they probably haven't rolled up their sleeves in 5, 10 years, maybe more. And their first reaction is, I got to hire people who hire people who hire people. And then you're like, this is not what we're doing, right? And so some of the mistakes we make, I think that Swiss Army knife, jack of all trades can stretch a lot farther than you think. And you really got to be prepared. If you want to bring on big company execs that, hey, is this what we want the culture to be, or do you want to promote from within, or do you want more roll up your sleeves? And I've seen, like, more oftentimes than not, big company execs in a $10-20 million company don't always pan out, and you get enamored by this logo, and that logo shine wears out pretty quickly. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, is my thought. So Ben Horowitz actually talks a lot about this in his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I technically reread that section after I had kind of gone through it. And it was 100% true, right? You bring in someone that's too senior, doesn't matter where they're from. And he talks a lot about the kind of like typical pitfalls. Like, they want to focus on one or two things. They want to hire people to hire people. They're a lot slower at making decisions and taking action. And yeah, we had all of those problems with this one particular person. And yeah, that's totally true. We actually typically hire more like senior director level more often than not, with the ability to grow in VP. We do have a couple, but people who understand how to still get their hands dirty, because we're still not big enough like to have just like a layer of leadership that just only manages, like not a lot of them. So we're figuring it out still.
But you added 100 people. And that's hard. That's really hard. We did the same. And we had a couple of great internal recruiters, but what hacks or tips you picked up along the way of finding the best candidates? How do you source candidates? Like, hopefully you continue to add so many people, or maybe not. Maybe this 100 people will add another 30 million in growth because hiring is insanity. But
I think as a young company or like a young entrepreneur, you think that like more people means like way better and awesome. And it is fun. Like, there are parts of it that just feels good, right? Like, you built a big company, but it comes with so many problems. And nowadays I definitely believe, like, if I could achieve obviously way more revenue with way less people, like, that would be the goal, maintaining balance and happiness, of course. But specific hacks, hacks, I don't even think is the right word. It was one of the toughest hiring markets I think that we've seen in a long time. We had an internal recruiter. We worked with external recruiters, which was really horrible last year, just because of how competitive the market was. And then there was a resource that I found called Shortlist, and I don't get any residuals or anything, so I'm really just sharing this from my heart. That was kind of the best combination of both. So it's a lot less expensive than a recruiter. They basically give you 10 qualified candidates. And we found someone almost every single time. So that was a really big resource that we used last year that really made hiring a lot faster and a lot better. Today we have we basically hired another internal recruiter with a lot more experience. So now we're doing most things internally, but it's a combination of inbound and outbound.
And what part of your team is it all distributed workforce in an office? What does that look like in this new reality?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Now, today, we're hybrid. So 98% of our team is in Los Angeles. We're in the office a couple days a week and at home a couple days a week.
How do you build a connection in this new reality, right? 130 people is not easy.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, hybrid really helps. I think being in the office even a little bit is so much better. I know there's so much pushback. We get it a lot too. I'm interested to see kind of how it works, over time. But I think having people come together, there's for not only just the culture, but also for collaboration, training new hires, getting feedback quickly. We have a very visual medium, especially for us, which is a video, which inherently also just takes a long time to render and export and share. So like being in person was really important for us, at least some of the time, so that we could give quicker feedback. But to build the community, I think you have to have great managers, right? Because the managers have to be have the resources to keep their teams happy. Like we have a new manager actually who just came in. He kind of came into a team that was like kind of not as happy as maybe some of the others, I guess. And he came in with tons of great ideas, and like they sort of seem silly in the moment, but then you see them like in action. Like he wanted he's in the sales team. Doesn't matter. Wanted like a Plinko board and and a wheel and all these things. And you see people like getting engaged, getting excited, laughing, like, different teams need different things. I think that's really important depending on who they are and, how they work. And I think empowering managers is finding great managers and empowering them with the resources they need to keep their teams happy is one of their primary goals as a manager.
Definitely. Now, what makes a great manager in your view? A good one and a great one?
A good one is a team that loves them and hits their goals. Like if you are a manager and you're hitting your goals and you have a team that's really happy, like to me, that's what's most important. Those are really high standards. Maybe that's too much, but I think at the end of the day, like that's the priority, And
I guess the leading indicator of that is the team is happy, the team is engaged, because if the team is disengaged and they're unhappy, then the results will show downstream, right?
Yeah, those typically go hand in hand. Now I've seen them not go hand in hand. I've seen, really high performers that are very unengaged, and I've seen the opposite. And I've thoughts around both, but I think great managers foster both.
Now, as a CEO of the scaling company, over 20 million in revenue, what goals do you set for yourselves? What do you recommend CEOs do here?
So I think about it in 4 ways. It sounds really simple, but it's all measured objectively. So happy team, happy customers, happy investors, happy me, right? That looks different for everybody, depending on where you are in your growth stage, what your goals are. All of those things can look a lot differently, but I think at the end of the day, those are the things that have to be measured somewhat objectively. It's like, that's how you can keep track, especially when things are, I think as a CEO, you get dealt with the hardest problems, right? You're at the very top. So absolutely the hardest things inevitably get dumped on your plate to solve. And so for a long time, that was very disheartening for me, because I was like, oh, I feel like I'm always dealing with crap, because I was. But that's my job in a lot of ways. And so I think being able to objectively measure some of those other elements helps put things in perspective, even during the hardest times,
Happy me is an important one that not many people talk about. But if you look at it, the biggest outcomes on the planet are founder-led. Shopify, Dropbox, Airbnb, right? Life in business is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you burn out as a founder, it doesn't do your business justice in the long term, because your team looks to you and they feed off that energy. What are some things you've done to, I guess, make me happy, or rather happy me?
It's a really great question. I think there's all the cliche things, right? Like taking care of yourself, like working out, reading, spending time with friends. The truth is, for me, this is where I struggle the most. I am, what I say is work makes me happy. And so I work a lot. And that's okay. I think that's where I am in my life. And I think giving myself the permission to be okay with that has been actually pretty transformational. I think for a long time, I had this idea of this is what balance is. And if you don't do all of these things, then you're not taking care of yourself. And then I wrote this big article and I was comparing Elon Musk and Richard Branson. And I was like, what? Both of them are right. And they're both just doing, this is a while ago, doing the way that they run their businesses differently. And I think that was important for me to understand that if work right now is what I find fulfilling, then I think that's okay. Now, this is going to sound so embarrassing, but I think some of the things that I like to do for work are things that I know are maybe not my best and highest value. And so sometimes I'll save those things for the weekend. I'll do the things that maybe aren't as impactful, but things that maybe bring me a little bit more joy. And I'll still factor those in and do them, but just not, Not when there's some fire that I need to be putting out that's probably more urgent.
Yeah, I found the same thing. Like, I had to keep reinventing my job in the job, right? Like whether it's focus on a new market or a new product line. So it kept me going, the work in the early days. And a big part of what I enjoy doing is just building community, and this traction stuff gave me great fulfillment when it came to work. So that's good. Finding meaning and purpose in your work is really important as a founder, especially. Now, what are some things you've done to make sure everyone on the team is well aligned with your broader company strategy and goals, right? Because 30 people, you're present all the time, you're friends with everyone, you're hanging out, you know everyone by first name. At 1:30, I doubt there must be a handful of people you don't know very well. And then over time, probably it'll get closer to 50%, but alignment is really important. Great companies have great alignment. How do you achieve that?
Yeah, that's really funny. That has been a very unusual experience for me when I see people and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know their name, but I don't want to obviously be wrong. And it's so weird. I don't like that. I do like to know everybody's name, but as you get bigger and as we're hiring so many people all the time, it's a very interesting experience. But right back to what you said, alignment. So talk about it is the first thing. I think one of the big things that we implemented this year, which maybe was too late, was later than it should have been, were OKRs, right? So for a long time, we were every leader was focused on like 50 different things, and we were sort of making progress on some of them and sort of not on others, and we weren't sure why things were and were moving. And so when we finally implemented OKRs this year, it made a big difference because now we could really see like, okay, these are the things that each department is prioritizing, that each leader and manager needs to be working on. So that provided a lot of alignment at a leadership level, and then sharing those with the team, right? Hey, this is what we're really focusing on. We're really focusing on, cycle time for our customers right now, and talking about that, getting everyone aligned, putting incentives out. That's another big thing. Like if we have a really big goal that we really are trying to achieve, we're talking about it. We're making it as fun as possible. We're putting incentives around it to get the team kind of jazzed about it. So yeah, I think it's just about, first things first, you have to get clarity on where you're going and what you're trying to achieve. And then it's about sharing that information with the team constantly.
I can't say this enough. It's very, very important to constantly communicate, to excite, motivate, and inspire people, right? It's not a one and done activity. You got to do this day in, day out, because people who are excited and inspired and motivated can move mountains. You're just communicating to sort of inform, and you may as well send an email or a memo, right?
Yeah.
But you got to jazz people up. You got to make sure they're excited about the purpose and energized, and communication plays a huge part in that. And I'm glad you brought that up. I want to take some audience questions if you're okay with it. Should we?
Yeah, of course. No hard ones.
Definitely. Yeah. There are no hard ones. There are only, I tried something and it worked or it didn't. So Anand asks here, you mentioned introducing new product line solutions to expand the business. Is there a process you guys use to identify new problems, opportunities, like expanding product lines or solutions? Like what thought process do you recommend people go through?
Yeah. So there's a few things. This is maybe even answering a bigger question. So constantly making changes is really stressful for your team, right? I feel like a lot of managers, especially process-driven managers, are constantly looking for ways to improve things. And when you're constantly rolling out new ideas and new processes and new products and new prices to your team every Monday meeting, it gets very overwhelming and it's very hard for people to keep up. So first things first, make sure that you're limiting changes we try to do once a quarter. Any humongous changes we try to do annually, right? That's one thing, unless it's absolutely urgent, of course. Then I would say, before you roll it out to the entire team, do some small testing with maybe one or two of, let's just say it's a sales product, one or two of your very top salespeople, right? Get the people who are most likely to succeed to try and test out that product or service or whatever it is. to see to get their feedback, to see how it goes for them. We, listen to the phone calls, get on the calls, listen, hear what your customers are saying before you make any final decisions, because most likely, unfortunately, in my experience, like what we think is exactly right is usually needs to be tweaked a few times before we actually get it right.
Certainly. And that is absolutely correct, right? Like people don't like change, although, the only thing constant is change. But if you keep like springing up new ideas on them, then they get quite nervous, right? And then also the second part of that is you got to earn the right to innovate. Like most companies at hyperscale have multiple product lines, but you got to be great at your first product and earn the right to innovate where your customers want those new products and whatnot. But Kyle asked here, what was your first customer acquisition activity? How did you get your first customer? I think, Kai, we talked about it. You said you just started reaching out to people, basically created a list.
Yeah. I mean, good old fashioned, basically sales. Like we made a list of sales. Probably, I think we pulled the list from Yelp, emailed them, asked them if we could come talk to them. And then we literally drove down and talked to them. I remember our first meeting was actually in Orange County, which is about an hour and a half away from where we are. Again, back to inefficiency early on. And so drove down there, talked to her, and ended up selling it. I remember thinking like, wow, I can't believe that worked.
Most successful founders start this way, right? You sell stuff before you build it. Even like you look at someone like Product Hunt or Angel List, they started as email lists, like, even Superhuman, you name the product, Airbnb, they all started with like doing things that don't scale because you need to validate it. And if you wait to polish it, then it is too late and you might lose the opportunity or it might never get off the ground, right? What does your, I guess, go-to-market effort today look like some scaled version of that? Just, is it sales heavy? I mean, you did talk about SEO and optimizing for every city, but is sales a big part of that equation today?
Definitely. We wanted, for example, we wanted to build out some technology. We wanted to, shift from services to more of a tech platform. And before this was a couple, maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point. And we had the opportunity to raise some money and do it. And I thought, that's going to be a really inefficient way to do this. I'm pretty sure, because we don't have any clue what we want. We don't know if our customers will use it. And, I wanted to be careful. I wanted to be smart. And so instead, what we did is we brought on one engineer and one designer, and we built a really basic version of an MVP, and we got customers on it, and we learned a ton. That's actually kind of the truncated version, but we learned a whole lot, let me just say, in that year. Before we finally said, you know what, okay, we think we know. Turns out we didn't do a great job, but we think we know what we need now. And we went out and we ended up raising a little bit of money against it this year and built out a full tech team. So still today, we do the same thing.
Definitely. And Lisa asks here, what growth channels and structures for evaluating the ROI were most effective and efficient when your product was not yet mature, right? Like now you built out this team, but how did you figure out like, hey, should I invest in ads or should I build a sales team? Or should I don't know, do events? Should I do SEO? Was there some thought process or you tried a bunch of things and it worked and started doubling down where you started seeing traction?
Kind of like all of those things. I think it depends on, first of all, it depends on the price point of what you're selling, right? Like what we did, we were selling things that were, several $1,000s. So especially, 8 years ago, it was very unlikely that someone would just click on an ad from a company they've never heard of to go to a Squarespace website that I personally built and didn't know what I was doing and buy something. And so for us, it was really about creating trust with our customers, with these early people, because we had no brand recognition. And so the way that we did that at first was literally going to meet customers in person. Now, if our product was $50, probably would not have been the same strategy. And over time, we don't meet really hardly any of our customers in person anymore because we do have some recognition and some brand equity. But I think at the end of the day, it depends on again, the price point and who your market is, especially if it's a B2C product. I think ads are a great way to get started and test things. If it's a more expensive product, it may take people even just getting on a virtual, meeting like this.
Bingo there, right? Like it depends on the price point. You need to build trust, and starts with visibility, then credibility and profitability. If you're selling $10, $20, $30,000 things, it's going to be hard to get somebody to just buy off by driving some traffic to your website. You need to meet them. And especially all that intel you gather from doing things that don't scale in the early days, figuring out the ideal customer, building lists, reaching out to them, meeting with them, trying to understand their pain points and seeing what message resonates. Those are things that you can scale, especially when your product costs a lot. Now, as you look back at your journey, what do you wish you did more of, and what do you wish you did less of?
Oh gosh. It's like, it's so easy in hindsight to like, I wish I did all of these things earlier. I don't know. I wish I would have figured out the technology part sooner, for sure. I think I sat on that for a really long time. And I don't know if I guess that's more of something, less of something. I wish I made less mistakes. I wish that I trusted my instinct a little bit more. I think there are times where it's like you hear something, you read something that someone else says or does, or like someone else has an idea and you're just like, I just feel that feels funky. It doesn't feel right. But at the end of the day, you always want to be open and try things. And I think that I wish, even if we went ahead and went through with it, I wish that I had vocalized maybe my opinions more. I do it a lot more now than I used to. And I think that's a big difference. I think that for a long time, I was so unsure that I would keep my thoughts to myself, and it led to some kind of messy parts of the business.
But, ultimately, if you don't fail, you don't learn on what not to do. So sometimes you got to make the mistakes. A lot of founders ask me, what should I not do? And I'm like, I'm going to give you this advice, but it's probably not relevant to you. You got to make your own mistakes and then learn and regret. And you'll grow for it. And that is really important. As you look back though, what was the toughest, lowest point of your career or journey as a founder, and how did you navigate it?
I remember that day. It wasn't actually with Lemonlight. That was with my first company. And my co-founder had just left me to go start a different company. And he had basically raised from a very reputable incubator, I think within like 2 weeks or something, like something just like painful for me to know, even though I was so happy for him. And I remember like having no money in my bank account. And I remember we had like an event for work, and I was like, for my startup. And I remember we had it, and it was like right after, the weekend after. And I was like, wow, I don't even know how I'm going to pay these people, these vendors that were there. My co-founder just left me to go start a company that's seemingly already, very successful. I don't really know what I'm doing. I was 23 at the time, and it was horrible. Like I had a couple of employees, but not many. I didn't know. I just had no idea what I was going to do. And I just remember being so like, man, this really sucks. I don't know what to do. I remember that day so clearly.
I think a lot of us have those moments, or have had those moments, and it's good to look back and think. But thanks for bringing that forth. How did you get over that though, mentally?
I don't know. I cried a lot, and then I just, got up the next day, and I was like, you have to pump yourself up. You have to just remind yourself, like, look, this is part of it. I remember Jason Calacanis once said, if you don't find yourself sobbing in the shower, unwilling to go to work, you're probably not an entrepreneur yet. And I remember thinking about that, and I was like, well, great news. I guess I'm an entrepreneur now. And
this is a great story. We're close to the top of the hour. To end this on, there's a Rocky Balboa famous quote where he says, it's not about how hard you can hit, but it's about how hard you get hit and you can keep moving forward. So I think that is really important. You get hit, you cry in the shower, or you cry yourself to sleep, but then you wake up and you have the courage and energy to keep moving forward. And that's what matters more. It's not the wins, but how you deal with the losses and come back and keep pushing forward that makes you an entrepreneur and a successful one at it. Any parting advice for us as we close this out here today?
Parting advice.
Maybe some unconventional advice that founders typically ignore. Maybe you ignored that people shouldn't.
I have both. So really quick, the advice that I ignored more than anything for a really long time was like to have a mission and to make it a priority, right, for your team. I think I just thought like, yeah, of course everybody knows what we're trying to do and why we want to do it and how fun it is and how we're changing the industry. But turns out once you get bigger, that people can become really detached from that. And they think like, oh, well, they're just in it to make money. Oh, like we're just here making the founders rich, which any founders out there know that's probably not what's happening at all. And it's painful. And I think that by deprioritizing or not acknowledging or talking about why you're really doing what you're doing is a disservice to you and the whole company, and it makes running your business a lot harder. So that was the first thing. That was like the biggest thing that I learned, and had to learn to vocalize, right? Because I always in my heart knew why. I could talk to my co-founders all day long about why and what we wanted to do and how we thought how impactful it was going to be. But making sure to share that with your team on a regular basis, I think, is really important.
Now more than ever, people need purpose, right? I understand, there was a time where there was the great resignation happening. Now, a lot of companies are cutting jobs and people, being laid off and whatnot. Regardless, though, we're in a world where I could drive an Uber and do Instacart and be on Fiverr and find a sense of income, right? And so for me or people to be attached to a company for the long haul, I think that purpose and that mission is really, really important. And great companies are built on great purpose. So that is a great learning to close off on. Thank you so much for joining us, Hope. You give us all hope. It's a little cheesy, but you built a company from sort of being that 23-year-old who lost a co-founder to now over 130 people, 20 million in revenue. Pain is a precondition for growth. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, wishing you great success, Hope.
Really great. Appreciate you so much.
I need some traction.